Stories can change our stories. This phrase isn't something new. If you've been around here in the past 2 years, you've heard me say this over and over again. Stories can change our stories. I say it over and over again because it's true. And you see, stories, they have this power that allows us to see possibilities in our own story. Stories can make us and allow us to view ourselves differently. Stories can have the power to allow us to see my pain differently or to see different possibilities. Stories that I hear can allow me to have hope or perspective. You see, stories can change our stories. The source of hope or a source of change or a source of inspiration. In that way, I think maybe we all have heroes in our own story. Maybe you thought of one person as we began the service today and we asked that question. You thought of a person that you may have never even met before that has radically changed your story. Does anybody know who this person is behind me? Without cheating, for those of you I've already told. Nobody behind me. Okay. Well, that's a graphic for that. Who's this person? Chadwick Boseman. Some of you better know Chadwick Boseman better as Black Panther. Okay? Now, the story of Black Panther that was portrayed by Chadwick Boseman has influenced and inspired hundreds and thousands of people. As one of the first black superheroes, he has given an entire culture hope and something to look forward to and something to look up to, where they begin to view possibilities and avenues and their own stories different. And you see, stories can change stories. Not only has he played Black Panther, but he also played Jackie Robinson in 42. He played James Brown. He played Thurgood Marshall, literally bringing to life all of these different stories and influencing so many other people's stories. You see, stories can change stories. And by the way, his story changed when he wanted to enroll in the midsummer program as he was attending a university. This is prestigious acting summer program. And he got a letter in the mail telling him that a benefactor had paid for his entire tuition. That benefactor was none other than Denzel Washington. And in the tribute to Denzel Washington and everything he's done, he said this phrase. He says, "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." This beautiful idea that stories can change stories. Do you believe that stories can change? I mean, sitting here today, do we honestly believe that stories can change? You see, I sincerely hope so, and I truly believe that stories can change. I've seen hundreds of stories changed in the small amount of time that I've been able to be active in ministry. I've seen stories in my own family change. I saw my dad's story change from this angry man who used alcohol to numb and to push down all of these things. And I saw him begin to open his heart to Jesus again. This angry, violent man became this teddy bear with road rage. He changed. I've seen some of your stories change. In the time that I've known some of you, I have seen your stories change. I've seen my own story change. You see, stories have a way of changing stories. But there's one similarity. In the midst of all these stories that are perpetually changing, there is something that is always the same. And I realized this week. In every story that changes, there is always a choice. There is always a choice that is made when a story changes. I want to take some time, and we're going to look at a really small psalm this morning. It's Psalm 120. And Psalm 120 begins this section in the book of Psalms that people have labeled the Psalms of Ascent. And in these short 14 or 15 Psalms, what we see are a group of writings that people, when they made their pilgrimages up to Jerusalem, however many times a year they were able, these are the songs that they meditated or that they sang or they said out loud or that they focused on as they were going up and making a journey to discover and meet God. You see, I love Psalm 120. Because as it begins this section of the Psalm of Ascent, we see two very powerful things. We see what we've talked about. We see that stories can change, but we also see that stories change when somebody makes a choice. If you want to read with me verses 1 and 2. Gotta find it. Here's how he begins the psalm. He says, I called on the Lord in my distress. Those verbs should be better translated in the past tense. He's telling his story. He says, I called on the Lord in my distress, and he answered me. In this very first verse, we see what we've been talking about. We see somebody at a point in their story where they want things to change. Whether it's circumstances or the chaos that's around them, somebody says, I want things to be different. And in order for things to be different, I'm going to choose to seek God. So if we keep it in the present tense, he says, I call on the Lord in my distress. I call on the Lord at the places in my story that I don't like or I want them to be different, or when chaos is just surrounding me or circumstances are out of control. I call on the Lord in the middle of these times and he answers me. These past 2 weeks, I've had to do 2 separate funerals. And those specific funerals were ones in which there are always going to be more questions than answers. Very unexpected, very tragic, very sad. And in those, there's always going to be a searching for why. Why do these things happen? Why are things ending this way? Why? And some of you in your own stories, you've reached places or points where you've asked why questions. And I always try to direct people, in our journey for searching for why, God always promises what. And the what that he's promised in the search for why is that I am always here. I listen. The Lord is very present and near to those who are in pain and sorrow and distress. The Lord answers and hears people that are at a place when they want to choose to change their story. So this person at the very beginning says, listen, I'm on my way to go meet with God. And on my way to go meet with him, I'm going to start this conversation. He says, save me, O Lord, from lying lips and deceitful tongues. There's things going on around him. He's in the middle of a culture, in the middle of an ecosystem that isn't producing the life that he so desires. I want you to understand that in this type of setting, with this language talking about lying, the deceitful tongues, it represents this culture of chaos. It represents disruption. It represents things that are going away from what God has designed and desired. So this person says, hey, listen, God, I'm calling to you in the middle of my distress, and you heard me, and I need you to help change this thing. I don't like where I'm at right now. And he goes on in verses 3 and 4. And he says this, 3 through 5. He says, what will he do? And what more besides, O deceitful tongue? He's asking a rhetorical question. He will punish you with warriors' sharp arrows and the burning of coals of the broom tree. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech and I live among the tents of Kedar. Now, I don't know about you, but I was tracking so far. I was like, okay, good. First start. He wants the story to change. He doesn't like it. He's living in the midst of this place and time in a story where things are chaotic and he doesn't want it. And then he says, hey, listen, what's going to happen because of this? And he uses language of shooting arrows and warriors, and it's really out of context for us, right? We don't make that leap well. I think what he's trying to illustrate and what he's trying to say, and people would understand this better in his time, is that the world and culture that he's living in, it's heading in a certain direction. It's heading in a direction which he doesn't like, and he doesn't want to be a part of that direction of where it's heading. So in a world that's surrounded by darkness and chaos, and God isn't a part of the story, there are certain things that are going to happen in that moment and in that time. And he says, listen, I don't want this. And here's usually where this is going to end up. And he gives two geographical locations. He gives the geographical location of Meshech and Kedar. Not anywhere that we have ever looked for or probably are ever going to find on a map. But in that culture, in that time, those were two cities that were known for the kind of this chaotic realm. They were warrior tribes. They lived in a world that was violent and chaotic. They lived in a world that didn't have any center or structure. They lived in a world that was filled of pain and suffering. There were always questionings. There always had to be something more. It was always about getting the next thing or taking this over, or always being worried and having all these things going on at exactly the same time. He says, woe to me because I have residence there. I literally pitched my tent in this area. This was my home. This is the type of world that I lived in. This is the type of life that I was used to. But he doesn't want that anymore. He says, I don't want this. He called out to the Lord in his distress and says, please help me. And the Lord heard his cry. And you know what began to happen? He made a choice to go in a different direction. There's this beautiful picture of these two geographical locations in Jerusalem being in a different spot where he makes this kind of decision to say, I'm going to leave this part of my story and I'm going to take steps towards a new chapter in my story. He says this in verse 6 and 7. He says, for too long have I lived among those that hate peace. And we have to understand when he talks about peace, it's not the absence of conflict. He says, for too long I've lived in this place where everything is disjointed. I lived in this place that didn't really have a purpose to anything. I lived in this place where nothing was working together or fitting like it should. For too long, I have lived there. I'm a man of peace. There's something inside of him that says, I know there's something more. A little narrative. It's okay. He's lived in a place. He's still going. Here he is. Okay, good. Sharp arrows. There you go. He has this revelation in verse 7. He says, I am a man of peace. I think there's a defining moment in some of our stories. I remember the defining moment in my story. My life was filled with chaos, darkness, pain, suffering, a whole bunch of choices that I made and choices I inherited from other people. And I remember one day specifically looking in the mirror, and I know it sounds really cliche, and I said, I don't want this anymore. And there was something inside of me that said, this is not who I am. I've pitched a tent here because maybe it made me feel safe. Maybe it brought belonging. Maybe it temporarily numbed the things going on in the world around me. But this is who I am. I'm a man of peace. I have something inside of me that longs for purpose, that longs for identity, that longs for something fulfilling, that longs for hope, that longs for joy. There is something inside of me that says, this is the way it's supposed to be. But when I speak about this, they are for war. He's at a point where he has to make a decision. He's at a point where he's tired of the same old story. He's at a point where he's tired of things being exactly the way that they were. And when he brings up these ideas, when he talks about hope or joy or a different reality, he's living in the midst of a place where it falls upon deaf ears. So he starts his journey. And he makes a choice. He makes a choice to change his story. He makes his choice to take one step in a different direction. Stories can change stories, right? This is a powerful story. When I first read it, it didn't make any sense. I'm like, why is this? It doesn't, arrows and tents, coals, trees, like what does this have to do with like searching for God? But it's a personal testimony of saying, I don't like where I am and I ask God to help me. Because everything I see around me is just heading this direction. And you know what? That's not who I am. That may be who other people are, but that's not me. And I'm going to make a choice today. 9 weeks ago, there's a group of people from this community that made a choice. 9 weeks ago, there was a group of people in this community of Beacon that made a choice to sign up for this program called Rooted. You've heard it advertised before. But in those 9 weeks, something happened. In those 9 weeks, they signed up searching for something. Perhaps even just a way of calling out to say, I need and want something different in my story. And you know what happened in those 9 weeks? Stories changed. These aren't bad stories to start with, but you know what? Stories changed. And it all started with the choice. But you know what? You guys hear my voice a lot. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from some people that participated in this Rooted program. We're going to hear some of their stories. Some of their stories may be really short. Some of their stories may be longer. But the reason we do this is twofold. Number one, to celebrate the choices that people make to change their stories. There could be one step in a different direction, and we here are going to celebrate that. Because when you change direction, sometimes you change your destiny, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to celebrate. And the other thing that we're doing, not only are we going to celebrate, but stories can change stories. You already said you believe that. So now, we're going to hear some different stories. Rooted participants, there is no order. There is no time frame. Share as much or as little as you want. I'm going to bring this microphone right to the center. Stand in this sphere, because otherwise we're going to have to move the camera around. It's going to be awkward for everybody. Okay? The closer you are to the microphone, the more friendly it's going to be for everybody. Okay? And other than that, let's hear some stories. I'll pick if I have to. Just saying. I know, I won't.
Yes, I really am that short. I sat back there telling to my husband, you should go, and he's not gone, so I came up anyway. So we went to a church for about 19 years, and then early in COVID felt like God was really telling us to leave, but he didn't tell us where to go. And for people who kind of just go to church all the time was really weird and awkward. And there was a lot that we gave up in leaving a place where we were very comfortable, and had lots of friends and people that we were related to. So not related to by blood, but had a relationship with. So my sign says, between churches in COVID, that we lost friends and fellowship, ministry, because we were involved with ministry there, worship time, because we were sitting on our couch, which I don't find the same as worship in person, a family, a purpose, dreams, relationships, and I put hope ? Because we didn't really ever lose hope, but it did feel like we're just kind of in the middle of we don't know what and we don't know where we're going. And then we actually had a friend meet Caitlin at a coffee shop in Mount Olive, and they told us about this place, and I had never heard of it before, and we were like, let's check it out. So we kind of went to Rooted to make like better connections with other people at the church, because there's a lot of people we just don't know very well. And we live in Carlinville, so that doesn't help our connectedness really much at all, although I don't think we're going to move here. So sorry. So I put now new, and then basically all the things that were on the other side, that we have new friends, new fellowship, new ministry, new opportunities for worship and relationships. So that's it.
So Amanda says I have to go next. Sorry about the creaking. So I'm Dan Fleischer, Julie's husband of almost 30 years. Okay. One of the best decisions in my life was marrying her. Change the story. So something that, yeah, and everything that Julie said applies to me. There's some other stuff that I wanted to mention. Something that's just dogged me for most of my life has just been a sense of, just lacking a sense of self-worth. I get involved in a lot of things and I can fake it. And I think people, Patrice, you and I have known each other for years. I don't know that you ever picked up on that. Okay, she said she hasn't. But something I've known is that God has instilled in me some interest and some technical abilities and just a desire to help out. And so there's this tension between the two of, okay, I can I'm in a position where I could try and take over if I wanted, but because of just a low sense of self-worth, I didn't want to be rude, so I would hang back on certain things and just wait for people to invite me to join. And that's something that has just been something that I haven't realized was an issue for a very long time until very recently through Rooted. And it was in talking with a friend of mine, and then hearing some of the things that Caitlin has said up here, and obviously John too, have to include him, that I am worthwhile and I'm divinely made. And the same is true of each of us here and everybody that we meet. I'm on my mom's side, I'm second generation in this country. My grandparents on her parents left Europe. Anti-Jewish sentiment kind of drove them out around World War I. My dad's family, I'm first generation. My dad was born in Europe, Central Europe. The brown shirts were on the rise, and the Jewish family decided to get out of Dodge. So starting there, all these seemingly unrelated things happened to bring me here, to have brought me through this life that I've led. That even though none of us can do anything to be worth what we received, I'm worthwhile, you're worthwhile, I'm divinely made, you are divinely made. And here we are. Thank you.
So my name is Carrie, and I don't know a lot of you. Yeah, COVID kind of did us all a weird thing, and so I definitely could say that, like, as we tried to come out of COVID, I'm not sure we're even close to there, but that for me, I felt a little lost, and there's lots of reasons for that. Julie invited me to come here one day. We were friends and went to church together before that, and so I just came, and I liked it here, and then I just kind of like rolled through some experiences. My history is I grew up in the church. I have chapters of the Bible memorized. I was in church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. I went on missions trips. I went on youth trips. I led. I was on the worship team. Like, I did all the things, and they were good. But I got to the point, and this was, I mean, I can see where it was a theme in my life, but I really got to the point about 6, 7, 8 years ago where I said, is this all there is? And I searched and I asked questions, and I just felt like I was missing something. But the people that I was asking, like, the answer I was coming up with is, yeah, this is it. All the stuff I just described, this is it. And honestly, I was like, well, maybe what's wrong then is me, because it should be enough. I knew that it was supposed to be enough. I knew that God was, loving and meeting our needs and all of these things. And I knew that all should be enough, but it didn't feel like it. So I decided what was wrong with me. And so, on my sign, I put on here that before, it's supposed to be a before and after. Before, I was kind of a planner and a doer, and I was pretty good at those things, but I didn't find it very satisfying. And so God, He is so loving, and He is so gentle, the way He pushes and pulls and walks along with us. And that's honestly what I needed, because the change that I needed was so subtle. And I have lots of things in my life that are catastrophic, and He was there for those, and He walked with me through those. That wasn't the change that I needed. The change that I needed was that the answer to that question of, is this all there is? The answer is no. It's not all there is. And for every one of you sitting out there, like what I've learned is, wherever you're at, the answer is no, because God is so loving that we can't even imagine it. And he's so gentle that we don't even know. And he's got more because he is infinitely good. Wherever you're at, whether you're down here or whether you're up here, he has more for you. There is more. And so I started this journey to discover what that more was. And I learned that there was room for me to make mistakes, to try things that weren't the right thing in that journey. And that's a little bit what I hadn't felt before in that bringing up through the church. I didn't ever feel like there was room to make mistakes. There wasn't room to try things. And honestly, I had a lot of people that were living back there at this is all there is, and it's good enough for me. And that didn't inspire me at all. So Rooted definitely was one of those steps that I took towards, okay, I believe there's more out there and I'm going to find it. And Rooted was really good for me to find that. So I tried to think of words that kind of spoke of where I am now. And so I put follower and partner, because that's really what God wants from us. He wants us to follow him, but not just blindly follow him. He wants to partner with us in what he has for our life. And I know now that that's what he wants for me, and I know that's what he wants for you guys too. And Rooted, again, it was instrumental in, we talked about 9 weeks, of just slowly seeing that laid out in every area of my spiritual life. And sometimes we need to hear something out loud. Maybe we know it inside and we suspect that it's true. But when we hear it out loud, spoken and processed through in a group of people that we learn to trust, it's really valuable. So that's what my experience was through Rooted.
I'm not good at public speaking. I'm not good at speaking in front of a crowd. Some of you know my story, some of you don't. I'll start where I feel that my story took a pivot in a direction that was more towards God than more away from God. I was sitting in the middle of a jail cell. And actually Psalm 120 was one of the verses that I read, and it gave me strength and hope. It's one of those verses that really changed part of who I am. Going through Rooted has brought me closer to God and my relationship with God, and with the community. We're not from here, so being in those small groups really helped me build those connections with people, helped me change my story in a direction where my life is getting better. I forgot my sign, my cardboard sign. But on the one side, the before side was a lost soul, is how I felt going through my journey, traveling to different places, living in different places. I just didn't know who I was or where I belonged. And I'm still on that journey of finding out who I am. But on the flip side, I'm found by God. He's never left me. He's always been there. I've been the one pushing away, trying to do things my own way on my own journey. But slowly, those layers are getting peeled back. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Well, it's caught on my earring. I'm just going to leave it on. Okay. I'm going to try to get through this without getting emotional, but not sure that's a promise I can make. So I actually went through Rooted, I think 3 years ago, maybe. And I got a completely different experience out of it the second time than I did the first time, which is quite amazing. And I decided to go through Rooted again because back in August, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and that has completely changed life as we know it. See, told you. Sorry. That left me feeling a lot of things. Anxious, confused, lost. Embarrassed. I felt like I was letting a lot of people down in my life. So anyway, all these things that I felt still feel day to day. It changes. It's a battle still, but I'm trusting that God will make a way for me to handle it and deal with it. And I have that little ray of sunshine that's down there that helps me do those things. So anyway, Rooted is helping me get through this new challenge that we're facing. So that's it.
Stories can change stories. I heard a lot of powerful stories. A couple that aren't ready to share yet, and that's okay. The beautiful part about everything that we've heard is that stories were changed because of God's story. There's nothing inherently powerful about this building. It's very pretty. It's very unfunctional. It's very old, but it's a place where powerful things can happen. There's nothing special about this day of the week. Okay? Nothing inherently powerful because, it's either the beginning or the end of the week, however you do it yourself. There's nothing inherently powerful about this program that's entitled Rooted. What's powerful is God. And I hope that in every story that you've heard, and even the stories that we haven't heard yet, or maybe even in your story, what we can begin to see is that stories change when we make a choice. And it's usually a choice to allow God to use and have his active power working in our lives. It's a choice to trust when things don't make sense. It's a choice to make a step in a different direction that changed a destiny and changed generations afterwards. It's a choice to be willing to try again. After you've been burned and you've seen the ugly version of what beautiful things can be. It's a choice as a planner to let go and to say, maybe my plan isn't the best plan. Doesn't mean it's not a good one, just maybe it's not the best one. And when we make that choice to allow our story to begin to intersect with God's story, powerful things happen. So I have some questions as we end our time. What's your story? As you sit here today, what is your story? Is it a story where you've pitched your tent in some pain and something in the past, and you said, this is just it, I'm just going to have to stay here? Is it a story where you have allowed the lies that other people have told you, or you tell yourself, to start becoming part of your identity? What's your story? I have some questions I want us to reflect on. I forgot what I wrote. First question is this: are you where or who you want to be? And I love you all, but I hope to some degree that answer is always no. I was in a social media black hole the other day. You know, where you just start scrolling and then 7 hours later you wake up, it's Tuesday, and you just, I got to be at work in an hour, what's going on? There was this guy who said, I can take down a crocodile. I'm looking, he's a big guy. But I said, there's absolutely no way you're going to take down the crocodile. Love you, but no way. He says, do you know when crocodiles are the most vulnerable? After they eat. They almost go into this catatonic state where they're filled and they're no longer hungry. That is when they are the most vulnerable. And I looked at him, I said, well, maybe he can kill an alligator. The reason that weird story was in there is because I would always hope that there's something in your story where you say, I want to keep going. I love this version of myself, but this is not the best version of myself, so I'm going to keep going. And I love where I'm at, but you know what? That's not where I want to stop. I want to do so many other things. I want to become such a different person. And the second question I have for you is this: what is a choice that you can make today that will change your story? If you're unsatisfied with somewhere where you're at, even though it may not even be a bad place, because the people that came up in here and shared were not really in a bad place. They had a lot of good things going on. They were just facing some difficult circumstances, but they still made a choice to say, I need to choose to do something because I'm unsatisfied here, and I know that God has some good things, so I'm going to make a decision to head this way. So what is a choice that you can make to change your story? For yourself, for the people around you. My dad made a choice, and you know what? When I was in the deepest, darkest point in my life, my dad, for some unknown reason, was a person that I started to ask advice to. The person I wouldn't talk to 5 years earlier, the person I hated and disdained, was a person I saw make a choice to get back in a relationship with God, and now all of a sudden I wanted to hear what he had to say. He made a choice, and his story changed my story. What do you want your story to be? Stories can change stories. And I hope that the stories that you heard today, and I hope zooming out on God's story, changes your story. Will you pray with me today before we take communion? Heavenly Father, we are thankful that your story changes our story. We're thankful, Father, that you have this beautiful story of creation, and that when things didn't end up the way that you wanted, you still saw this worth and value in all of us and everything you created to say, I don't want this story to end this way, so I'm going to send my son Jesus. We're thankful, Father, for the power that we have through his death and resurrection to change our story. And we're thankful, Father, for the freedom that you have given us to make a choice today that can lead us in a totally different direction. So, Father, no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what we're carrying, no matter what we're struggling with, no matter what the circumstances are, the pain, the past, the problems, whatever that is, Father, I pray that you would meet us here today that you would speak to our hearts and our minds, whether it's trust or being open or whatever it is, Father. Will you flood us with your power in this room? Will you help us and lean us in the direction through your grace to make just one step, just to make one choice in a totally different direction so that our stories can be what you have designed and what you desire them to be, which is more than we can ever think or imagine. Help us as we find ourselves here today. We ask this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.